Okay, beautiful. So, good evening, all. It's good to see you all. And as I mentioned, I'd hoped to, you know, as we miss reading the Parsha in Shul now, it's been 2 weeks, so it's probably a good thing that we come together and just think about the Parsha a little bit, think of some of the structure and some of the themes. But this we're going to do like 30 minutes. We'll do like a quick, focused shear and try to make that, hopefully, who knows what it'll be next week. I mean, certainly next week we'll be back here, but then the week after that, who knows what will be. So, just very briefly, this is, of course, Parshat Shoftim, right? And that's just kind of just to mention what that is. And I think the point that I wanted to focus on is, and this is I mentioned last night, is that all of the Parshiot that we read, that we end up reading during the month of Elul, all have many, many, many messages and themes and ideas of Teshuva. And it's been organized to do exactly that. And so what I want to do over these next few weeks as we move towards Rosh Hashanah is try to focus on those elements. So I have a nice idea that I want to share with you tonight, but just very briefly in terms of the structure of the Parsha, for those who are not familiar. So Parshat Shoftim has a lot in it. It has lots of different mitzvot. It, of course, begins with the instruction to appoint judges and law enforcement officers, and it has, of course, the famous pasuk tzedek tirdof, right? Justice, justice you shall pursue, and it has this idea of pursuing justice and ensuring that crimes are investigated as they should be, and it also discusses the idea of a minimum of 2 witnesses. It talks about the idea of establishing those who are going to interpret the Torah and appointing rabbis to interpret the Torah and to understand it. Shoftim also has within it prohibitions against idolatry and and sorcery, and it has a fascinating mitzvah to appoint a king. And there's many questions as to how that works. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, last year, we were in lockdown last year as well. Last year we discussed this mitzvah of appointing a king. Shoftim also, for those of you who've just come in, I'm going through just kind of the basic structure of the Parsha before we jump into one particular idea. Parsha Shoftim also has another explanation of what are called the Arei Miklat, the cities of refuge, for people who have committed inadvertent but negligent murder. It goes through the laws of war and those people who are exempt from fighting in war and the different rules. So, for example, somebody who's just built a home but hasn't been able to kind of settle it, someone who has planted a vineyard but hasn't been able to kind of reap its harvest, someone who is married but hasn't really been able to spend time with their wife, and also, interestingly, someone who is kind of soft-hearted. I actually shared at the committee meeting. Anybody here on the committee? No, it doesn't look like it. So the other night, I haven't said this week at all, so it's fine. I just heard this really nice idea. I got to be careful how and when I recycle my divrei Torah. The Gemara, sorry, not the Gemara says. The Torah says that if somebody has a soft heart, right? If somebody is afraid, then they don't have to go to battle. So there's a machloket in the Gemara as to what does it mean that the person is afraid. So there's one opinion that says we're talking about somebody who is actually afraid of going into battle, like properly, doesn't want to fight. So if they don't want to fight, we don't want them fighting with us, right? But Rabbi Akiva fascinatingly says that no, it's somebody who is afraid that they have some sin, that they've committed a sin, and therefore when they go into battle, that sin might negatively impact their campaign. Because, of course, when the Jewish people were, conquering the land of Israel, it was not simply a physical conquest. It was also a deeply spiritual one. And so there are all these spiritual rules that they had to kind of follow. And so Rabbi Akiva says that a person who was afraid that they had a particular sin on their hands, they could not go into battle. But that's the Kutzker Rebbe asked them and says, wait a second. if a soldier was concerned that they had some sin, that person shouldn't go into battle. How small was the army, right? Like, everybody sins, right? How many people could actually say, like, oh, I've never sinned before. Now I'm, only a couple of yeshiva bachers. We don't want them fighting for us anyway, So a bunch of guys with skinny arms, in white shirts. Like, that's not what we want. So the Kutzker Rebbe says, no, it's not that he's never sinned, but rather it's someone who's never sinned and they have yet to do teshuva. They have yet to repent. Because if a person sins and does teshuva, then of course, that's the ideal. I mean, the ideal is that we don't sin, but we sin. But if a person has sinned and they've done teshuva, then of course they can step into battle. What we're talking about here is someone who has sinned and hasn't yet done teshuva, and they're afraid that they've got this sin on their hands. And so what we see from here is kind of the transformative power and nature of teshuva, that it allows the person to really be able to move on. They've changed. They can move on and as such go into war, whether that is, kind of the physical war or the spiritual war. So that's a nice idea there. So again, we mentioned that talks about the rules of going into war. And it also talks about the prohibition on destroying fruit trees. And we derive from fruit trees in the time of war that if you're going to make a bulwark, if you're going to try to make a battering ram, when you lay a siege around a city, you cannot cut down fruit trees because fruit trees can be used for food. And this, of course, becomes the source for the prohibition of what? Get some audience participation.
Bal Tashchit?
Bal Tashchit, very good, for $500. Thank you, Ari. So, right, Bal Tashchit.
I'll be invoicing tomorrow morning.
It's part of the game. We haven't won yet, Ari. This is there's a few more questions, don't worry. Anyway, so Bal Tashchit, exactly, which maybe we'll get onto in the final few minutes of this micro shear, if you will. The Parsha finishes with the fascinating law of what's called the Egla Arufa. The Egla Arufa, how we translate it is an interesting way, but it is this type of cow that's basically, it's a special procedure that is used to determine, basically, well, it's not to determine, but it is done where there's, God forbid, a dead body that's found in between two different cities, and nobody knows who did it. The two elders, or the elders of the two different cities where this person passed away on the road in between them, they go through this elaborate procedure, and which we'll look at in a moment, in order to basically atone, if you will, for the murder of this individual who we don't know what happened to them. Okay, so that is the Parsha in a nutshell, in a sense, and Parshat Shoftim. So there's a lot there, but what I want to do is I want to focus actually just on the Egla Arufa. So I'm just going to share my screen with you. Give me one moment here. If I can just find it. Where did I put it? There you go. All right. Cool. So let's just read together. Why is it like this? Let's just read together the move this here to the side. Let's read together the psukim. Ki matzeh halal ba'adama asher Hashem Elokecha noten lecha l'rishta nofel basadeh lo noda mihiko. If in the land that the Lord your God is assigning you to possess, someone slain is found lying in the open, the identity of the slayer not being known, V'yatz'u zkenecha v'shoftecha umadedu el ha'arim asher svivot hechalal. So the elders and the magistrates shall go out and measure the distance from the corpse to the nearby towns. V'haya ha'ir ha'krova el ha'chalal v'lakachu ziknei ha'ir hahi eglat bakar asher lo ubad ba asher lo mashcha be'ol. The elders of the town nearest to the corpse shall then take a heifer which has never been worked, which had never pulled a yoke. V'horidu ziknei ha'ir ha'hi ha'tegla el nachal eitan asher lo yeyaved bo v'lo yizarea v'arfu sham et ha'egla b'nachal. And the elders of the town shall bring the heifer down to an ever-flowing wadi, which is not tilled or sown. There in the wadi they shall break the heifer's neck. V'nigshu akohanim b'nei Levi, kivam b'char Hashem elokecha l'sharto l'varech b'shem Hashem, ve'al pihem yeh koriv v'chol naga. The priest, the son of Levi, shall come forward, for the Lord your God has chosen him to minister him and to pronounce blessing in the name of the Lord, and every lawsuit in case of assault is subject to their ruling. And all the elders of the town nearest to the corpse shall wash their hands over the heifer whose neck was broken in the wadi. Ve'anu ve'amru, and they shall answer and say, make this declaration, Yadeinu lo shafchu et adam, hazeh ve'einenu lo ra'u, and they shall make the declaration, our hands did not shed this blood, nor did our eyes see it done. Kaper la'amcha Yisrael asher padita Hashem v'al titein dam naki b'kerev amcha Yisrael v'ni kaper lahem hadam. Absolve, O Lord, your people Israel whom you redeemed, and do not let guilt for the blood of the innocent remain among your people Israel, and they will be absolved of the blood guilt. Thus you will remove from your midst guilt for the blood of the innocent, for you will be doing what is right in the sight of the Lord. So it's a strange sort of procedure or ritual that is used again in tragic circumstances. But what are some of the things that we notice? So I'm wondering, you can feel free to unmute yourself. Is there anything that stands out to you that's strange in this sort of the way that these things happen? And what stands out to you here? And if you want, I'm going to do. I'm just going to copy for those who want to look at it on their own. In the chat box, I've just put the sources. Is there anything that stands out to you as strange, as remarkable, as noteworthy, something you have a question on? What do you think?
Just weird bringing this heifer into it.
Yeah, like what the poor thing do, right?
Mm.
Now, again, certainly within our ancient traditions, of course, animals were used as these stand-ins, right? They were...
Isn't that where the term scapegoat comes from?
Well, not this one. The scapegoat's for the actual scapegoat, right?
Yeah.
The Seir Lazazel. But right, I mean, it's the poor things. They did nothing, right? They're like sitting there chewing grass, and all of a sudden, but it's obviously a very kind of visceral sort of ritual, right? And of course, so what does it symbolize? What do you think? What does this Egla Arufa symbolize?
Not knowing who's responsible.
Well, why does that symbolize the Egla Arufa, so what are the laws that has to be around, I'm going to be specific. The actual animal, not the whole ritual, right? But the specific animal, what do you think it represents?
The innocent person the person who was killed.
Right, the person who was killed, who, by the way, might not be so innocent. We don't know, right? It could be like a gangland murder, right? And, and he's been, slinging dope and is kind of cutting deals on the side. Who knows, right? But at the end of the day, right, this person, to an extent, is innocent. We can only assume that they are innocent. And so here they take this animal that has never worked a day in its life. We take it to land that has never been worked, and we kill it. And we soak the ground in its blood, in a sense. I mean, it would break the neck, but we can assume that it's bloody. And what do you think that this symbolizes, right? This symbolizes this person. But I think that there's something going on here, in a sense, to say, we're going through this really profound ritual. And at the end of the ritual, what do we receive? We receive atonement, in a sense, right? This is an attempt to achieve atonement. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, because this person will never be brought back, right? You have this thing, this potential that could have been, this life that could have been, and it never will be. Whatever, no matter how elaborate a ritual we can devise, at the end of the day, life has been changed dramatically. And this, in a sense, if we can relate it to our own experience, right? That when not in the sense of murder, right? But in a sense of we make decisions and we change the reality around us. And when we make poor decisions, we make good decisions, but especially when we make poor decisions, it has an impact on the world moving forward. And life and reality is irrevocably altered. And even if we do Teshuva, the world still is irrevocably altered. But what we see is nonetheless, there is the possibility of atonement. There is the possibility of some level of healing. Will it ever bring this person back? No, it will never bring that person back. But for the sake of society, this ritual is important. Because this ritual is not simply, and let's think about this, it's not simply just to say, tell so that the elders say, oh, it wasn't our hands. Like, we didn't do it. Because, by the way, when they're saying we didn't do it, what really are they saying? They're saying we did it.
They're responsible.
Right? They're saying we are responsible. When they're saying our hands did not spill this blood, they are actually saying that it is our responsibility. Why is it their responsibility? What do you think?
Well, they were the closest to the person who was killed. That was the town where it was closest to.
Okay, but still, it got some old dudes who were like sitting there in the magistrate's, the clerk's office, like pushing papers. It's their responsibility. How did they do it? So there's several answers that are given. One answer that's given famously, Rashi brings it there, is that they failed to accompany this person on the way out of town, right? Had the person been accompanied on the way out of town, they would have been safe. That's one answer, and we learned from there the importance of kind of seeing someone out. Do you remember when we used to have people in our homes? You remember that time, right? You remember that situation? That was strange, right? And what we get from there, there's this halacha, what actually you're supposed to accompany a person outside of the home, right? It's interesting. So we can remember this for a couple years' time, right? You bring somebody out of the home, right? Because you don't want to just like send somebody off on their way, okay? So that's one answer, that they didn't accompany them. But maybe the more powerful answer is, who are the people getting involved here? The Shoftim and the Shotrim and the Kohanim, right? And all of these are individuals who are responsible not just to deal with the crime once it's happened, but maybe more importantly, to try to prevent crime in the first place. That the leaders of the generation, the spiritual leaders of the generation, because the Shoftim were not simply, they're not simply lawyers, right? These are people who are responsible for the spiritual, the ethical, values of the people. And clearly, they didn't do a good enough job. They didn't do a good enough job because somebody died under their watch. And so when these elders, these zkenim, are washing their hands, they are in essence saying it is our responsibility. They are taking responsibility, right? And when they take responsibility and they do this act and people hear about it, the point of this act is actually to try to remove violence from their midst. Because when they, instead of just saying, oh, there was this thing and it was terrible, it's awful, and go sit with the family, what they're actually doing is they're going there, seeing the body, and then doing this act of killing this poor animal. And I am sure that they will walk away from that somewhat shaken and doubly committed to promoting peace and tolerance and ensuring that violence does not happen there. Right? Any thoughts or questions, anything that anybody wants to raise at this moment?
Yeah, I'd like to ask or say, I think it makes it too easy for them to feel better. How it's a ritual. They know that this is something they have to do. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to actually. And how do you know that this person was leaving the town and not coming? Does it say somewhere that?
Yeah, that's a good question that you can ask on what Rashi brings there, to assume that like they were leaving the town, right? Yeah, good question, because they don't see like which way the body was facing or whatever it is that, you know, and because again, it's not how it works out.
Between two towns, you can assume if it's between two towns, it was coming from one and going to the other, or just happened in between.
Right, but again, what they do is, they get both parties involved, and then the one who measures closer, right? Because you're right, it could have been either one, but it just happens to be the measure who's closer.
I think it's quite a good model of leadership, given some of the models of leadership that we actually are witnessing in our time, where people kind of just retreat behind excuses and borders and don't actually kind of cooperate for the good of the whole community.
Yeah, nice, exactly. And on that,
why don't both the towns do it?
I'm sorry?
Why don't both the towns do it?
Yeah, that's a good question, right? Like, why don't they just like, okay, let's measure it, and then like, let's all do it together? Really good question, Craig. I'm not sure. It's possible that the Meforshim do deal with that. But I think at the end of the day, like, you know, you're right. They could all take responsibility, but they focus on one. Good question. I'll look into that. So what is interesting, I'm going to share this screen with you one more time here. What's interesting is, so when they apologize, in a sense, what they're doing is they're saying, our hands did not shed this blood, nor did our eyes see it done. And the claim that's being made by our tradition is that when they say that our hands did not shed this blood, they're in essence saying our hands did shed this blood, okay? But you can see they're saying, okay, we didn't do this. We didn't do this. But even though they say we didn't do it, what are they still doing? They're still taking responsibility. They're still taking responsibility. In a similar sort of vein, I saw an article. Sorry, I'll just point out that the Moreh Nevuchim here, I brought the whole Moreh Nevuchim here. The Moreh Nevuchim points out that the whole purpose, I'll just read here. As a rule, the investigation, the procession of the elders, the measuring and the taking of the heifer make people talk about it. And by making the event public, the murderer may be found out. And he who knows of him or has heard of him and has discovered him by any Jew will now name the person as the murderer, right? So what they're doing is, in essence, according to the Moreh Nevuchim, though not everyone agrees with this, according to the Rambam, by making this kind of public display, they're not just kind of shoving it under, you know, oh, we found another body out by the, you know, by the town border. No, they're taking responsibility, and that will eventually get people talking about it. But what they're doing is they're taking responsibility. They're taking responsibility. And a similar thing, I saw this interesting thing from a parenting blog in the New York Times, and it talks about the admonishing children, and it can be worked not just for children but also for partners, right? And so it says the following thing, right? The context here is about taking responsibility for your actions or telling somebody off. So listen to what he says here. It could have been, I love you, but you're driving me crazy. Or any of the following. I love you, but you're not listening to me. I love you, but stop leaving dirty dishes in the sink. Or I love you, but I need some time alone. I've begun many a sentence with those 4 words, right? I love you, but. And never pause for a moment to think of what they mean. What are we actually conveying when we begin a sentence like that? Oh, sorry, this is what the woman was saying about her relationship with her husband. What my husband heard wasn't the first part of the sentence, but the second time. But the second, every time. What he heard was, I love you if, and I would love you if you only would. He didn't like it. He said so, and I'm glad he did. My husband asked if I could replace the word but with the word and. I love you, and it would be great if you did the following thing, right? I stopped and repeated the sentence I just said to him with the revision, and the light bulb inside my head nearly blinded me with epiphany. I love you, and you are driving me crazy. And so, again, this is somewhat of a stretch of a connection, but what we're seeing here is the rabbis, the elders, taking responsibility. They're not saying, we have this dead body, but it's not ours, and this is they're saying, okay, this happened, we didn't do it, and we're taking responsibility. So it's a kind of, somewhat of a stretch, I would admit, but it's about the language that we use to communicate with people how we're feeling or taking responsibility for things. And the subtlety in language, what's communicated very clearly here, even though they use this language of our hands did not shed this blood, but what's communicated very clearly is a taking of responsibility. And so too, when we are, sharing with someone and maybe admonishing others, we have to be careful in the language that we use. Okay. Now what time is it here? I just got to move. I think 8:29. It's somewhat late, but I'll just point out if you look here as well. Sorry, one second. The verse here says, "Kaper la'amcha Yisrael asher padita Hashem." Kaper means atone, right? Absolve. But kaper, I'm just going to stop sharing for a moment. Kaper, what does kaper mean? Does anyone know what does kaper actually mean? What does atonement really mean? When we're asking God for kapara, for atonement on Yom Kippur, what are we really asking for? So I'll share just a beautiful idea that I think will maybe kind of push us and guide us into the next few weeks, that it's pointed out by many, Rabbeinu Bachia specifically focuses on the fact that kaper doesn't just mean to atone, but actually kaper or kapara means to uncover. Lechaper means to uncover. And actually that is used in many other contexts throughout the Torah. Maybe we can have an exploration of that as we draw close to Yom Kippur, how kapara really means to uncover a particular reality. And so when we are saying here in the case of Egla Arufa, that kaper al amcha, to uncover, what are we trying to uncover? Well, in the simplest sense, we are trying to say to uncover who the killer is. That this process of the Egla Arufa is actually, like we saw with the Rambam earlier, the purpose of it is to try to uncover the reality. And so too, if we think about the act of kapara, of achieving atonement, it's trying to uncover our true reality. It's trying to uncover who we really are. That when we are trying to achieve atonement, right, putting the Egla Arufa aside, in our own interpersonal or, in terms of relationship with Hashem, we're seeking out atonement. What we are seeking is an uncovering. That in the midst of the relationship breakdown, whether it's between us and other people and us and God, then the truth of reality gets covered up. Teshuva and kapara is all about uncovering and finding what is underneath and connecting to our true reality. And so it's just from that little word and from the insight of the Rambam, Rabbeinu Bachia, that we start to sense that this word kapara, that atonement, is not simply to atone, whatever that means, for to wipe out, but rather it's talking about uncovering a hidden reality. In the case of the Egla Arufa, it's talking about uncovering the hidden reality of who the killer is, Rahman al-Atzlan, God forbid. And in the case of us and Yom Kippur and achieving atonement, it's about uncovering our true hidden reality of a soul that is deeply bound up with God. And that's what we're trying to achieve as we draw close to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Any questions?
I have one.
Sure.
I appreciate all the things you said, and I don't want to take away from what you said, but specifically, and not but, specifically in that example of the Eglah Rufa, it seems to me that it's not about their words but about their actions, because their words consistently say, we haven't done this, we don't have blood on their hands, but their actions show that they're taking the responsibility. So
Yeah.
I appreciate all the other things you said about words and their importance, but I think this example is really one of where they're saying, no, their words are clearly saying no, but yet their actions are showing that they're taking the responsibility.
Yeah, good. Which, yeah, maybe is more powerful in a sense, right? To say like, okay, it didn't happen, it wasn't my responsibility, but it is. I'm taking responsibility through action, right? I'm taking focused response, and maybe I'll connect this back to what we saw. So thank you, Judith. Right, to connect it back to what we mentioned before about specifically taking a heifer that has not been worked before and killing it in a wadi that has not been worked, that has not been toiled. That this is talking about that there is a reality that's changed. This thing that was one way is not that way anymore. And so they say, okay, we didn't do it. And we are going to do now specific actions to ensure what? To ensure it will never happen again. So I think you're right. It's not really about the words, though. Again, I think the rabbinic tradition is to understand. We say we didn't do this. When they say we didn't do it, it means we did it, right? It's kind of like a rabbinic, sort of a Torah language. There's an irony in a sense, right? It's like we didn't do it. No, you did it. But you're right. The main focus here is on the actions that are taken, both to symbolize their culpability, but maybe more importantly, to set into motion the judicial process of trying to figure out who did it, and also kind of setting into place the assurances that they'll try to prevent it from ever happening again. So I think that's a really important point that you made. Thank you. Cool. I said 30 minutes. That was a little bit more than 30 minutes. I hope you have what to think about and what to talk about over Shabbos. I'll miss you all deeply over Shabbat, and hopefully we can see you very, very soon. And yeah, have an awesome Shabbos, everyone.
Thank you. Shabbat
Thanks,
shalom,
Rob.
everyone.
Shalom.
Take care,
Have a good
guys.
Shabbos. See you later.
See ya.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye.